Within a dark and menacing castle, the Demon Lord is getting ready to begin his conquest to take over the world, and to do that he summons his 4 demonic generals. Almandra the Inferno, Sylphid the Storm, Genome the Earth, and finally summons the most cynical and soulless of them all, an underpaid Japanese salaryman. Denisuk started working for his company as an insignificant salaryman, but he was hope-filled and surely he would make his way up the promotion ladder at some point. However, while Denisuk was working hard for the sake of the company, his colleagues were all kissing up to their boss, so they ended up getting promotions while Denisuk ended up getting shipped off to another country to work on expansion. Upon arrival, Denisuk found that literally nothing was getting done because the site had no funding. He tried to convince his boss to approve more funding so they could buy the necessary equipment, but that would cost money, so his boss refused and yelled at him for wasting money. The locals couldn't care less about the job if they weren't going to be given the necessary tools, so they left, and Denisuk ended up having to do everything by himself. However, after seeing how hard Denisuk was working even though he was by himself, the locals were inspired and soon returned to help him out, but just when he finally got everything up and running, he had a call from his boss, and at first, he thought his hard work was finally being recognized, so he would be getting a much-needed bonus, but he was dead wrong. It didn't even throw him a pizza party. All he got in return for his hard work was even more work, as they decided to transfer him to another country for a separate expansion project. By this point then, Denisuk had begun to question his life choices because he realizes that he is wasting his life for a company that clearly doesn't care about him, but while he is distracted by his existential dread, he isn't paying attention to his surroundings, so he ends up getting run over by a motorbike. That kind of explains how he ended up here, but Denisuk thinks there must have been some kind of mistake because there's no way the Demon Lord meant to summon a guy like him. However, the Demon Lord calls him by name and tells him that he summons him here to become his new overseas manager. He's received extensive reports on all the hard work Denisuk had put in. He was assigned to an overseas branch of his company, learned the local language, and gained the trust of the locals to successfully run the new business. That is why the Demon Lord thinks Denisuk would be the perfect candidate for one of his 4 elite generals. Denisuk is kind of happy since this is the first time anyone has ever actually acknowledged all the hard work he has been putting in, but he's a bit hesitant to accept the position of Demon General because that would technically mean he is betraying humanity. However, the Demon Lord mentions that the position will come with full workers' benefits, and all of a sudden, Denisuk doesn't think joining the Demon Army is such a bad idea anymore. On top of that, the Demon Lord actually respects workers' rights, so he won't force Denisuk to accept the position if he doesn't want to. All this makes Denisuk really want to join. When he thinks about it, he remembers how he was always treated like trash back in his old company, and he doesn't think trash like him deserves to have such an important job, so he's about to reject the Demon Lord's offer, but before he does, the Demon Lord yells that he can't let the way he was treated at his former company dictate his worth. That place was run by obnoxious and selfish managers who only cared about themselves, so they would never pay attention to all the work Denisuk was putting in behind the scenes, but the Demon Lord won't make that mistake because he is well aware of how valuable Denisuk is as an employee. So will he choose to go back to his old company and be treated like trash once more, or will he stay here and help build the Demon Army? Denisuk is still a little hesitant to accept. All of a sudden, Almandra speaks up and says she objects to the idea of having a weak human in the Demon Army. Sylphid and Genome also object to the idea because they can't see how someone like him could possibly help the Demon Army. The Demon Lord understands why they would be skeptical, so he decides to put Denisuk through a test to show the others just how capable he really is. Denisuk starts freaking out and tries to explain to the Demon Lord that he has no powers, so he can't fight, but it's already too late because Almandra has decided to attack him at full force to see what he's made of. She heard something about otherworldly humans possessing special powers, so tells Denisuk to try and stop her deadly kick. However, before the kick could land, the Demon Lord steps in front of her and stops it. Almandra asks why the Demon Lord interrupted her, but he points out that she didn't wait for him to finish talking, so she ended up misunderstanding the situation. Look at poor Denisuk over there, he got so scared that he passed out from the shock. The others are surprised because Almandra wasn't even trying that hard, so for Denisuk to pass out from an attack like that, it makes it seem like he's just a regular human. The Demon Lord tells them that Denisuk really is just a regular human, and that makes them all object to the decision even more. The Demon Army is made up entirely of monsters, so if a human were to enter the power struggle between the demons and demi-humans, then he would get eaten alive almost instantly. The Demon Lord admits that there is a bit of friction between the factions of his army, but that's exactly why he needs Denisuk and his skill set. He doesn't expect him to have a sturdy body or incredible attack power, but rather what he expects from him is his resourcefulness. Just then Denisuk finally regains consciousness and begins pleading for them to let him go because there's no way he can deal with attacks like what Almandra just tried to hit him with. The Demon Lord tells him to calm down and explains that he won't be expected to fight, but the Demon Lord does intend to give Denisuk a fitting exam. He explains that the demon army is currently trying to create a pact with the surrounding tribes, and so far, they've managed to reach an agreement with the salamanders and werewolves, but negotiations with the Minotaur tribe has been quite difficult, so Denisuk's test will be to do whatever it takes to form a pact with the Minotaur tribe. With Denisuk's superb negotiation skills, it should be simple enough to gain the Minotaur's trust and reach an amicable agreement, but Denisuk doesn't see anything simple about negotiating with Minotaur. However, the Demon Lord seriously believes he can pull it off, so he tells Denisuk to ask Almandra if he has any questions. Afterwards, Almandra leads Denisuk down the hall so he can begin negotiating with the Minotaur, but she thinks this is a huge waste of time since there's no way a human like Denisuk can negotiate with Minotaur. Denisuk thinks she's right about him being useless, but the Demon Lord seems so sincere when he was talking about how much he needed Denisuk, and all Denisuk has ever wanted was to have his hard work recognized, so he wants to live up to the Demon Lord's expectations of him as much as he can. Just then Almandra tells Denisuk that they've arrived at the meeting room where the chief of the Minotaur tribe is staying, and Denisuk is a bit shocked by the sheer size of the room, but Almandra explains that it's perfectly normal since the Minotaur are big monsters, and as a fair warning, she tells him that Minotaur are known to be quite ferocious, so if he's not careful he's going to end up getting himself trampled to death. As Almandra opens the door, Denisuk has no idea what to expect from the Minotaur chief, but he intends to do his best to negotiate no matter what. However, once he actually sees the Minotaur chief, he freaks out. There's no way he could negotiate with someone like Terius without instantly dying. Almandra feels bad for him, so she offers to help him out with the negotiations, and Denisuk is really thankful for the help, but then he sees Almandra start arguing with Terius, so he gets the feeling that negotiations aren't going so well. Almandra doesn't understand how Terius could be dissatisfied with everything they provided for him, and Terius says she doesn't understand what he's saying, so no headway is made on the pact, and Almandra leaves the meeting room. Almandra really doesn't understand why it's so hard for Terius to agree to the pact now when he was initially open to the idea. Just when they were about to finalize the agreement, he started yelling no over and over again. Almandra came back several times to see if he would agree to the pact again, but all he would ever say was no, so she couldn't understand what he wanted. Almandra can't possibly see a resolution, so she's going to leave the rest for Denisuk to figure out, although she fully expects him to fail miserably. Denisuk starts having a full-on panic attack because he thinks there's no way to get around this mess, but as he is walking through the halls trying to figure out what to do, he spots a bar sign and decides to head in to clear his head. The bartender gets him a warm towel to calm him down, and Denisuk orders a drink while he sits down to think. He would like to work on the negotiations, but there's nothing he can do if the client refuses to negotiate. However, Denisuk then realizes that Terius might not actually be refusing to negotiate after all. He has experienced a situation like this before where a client was constantly telling him no, but when he looked into the client's eyes, he could tell what he really meant, and both sides were eventually able to reach an agreement. He now knows what he needs to do, so he finishes his drink and heads outside to do what businessmen do: negotiate. Meanwhile, Almandra is back in the Demon Lord's throne room giving a report about her conversation with Terius, and it didn't lead to any meaningful breakthrough, so she doesn't think Denisuk will be able to achieve anything either, especially since he just arrived in this world today, but the Demon Lord still has faith in him, so he tells her to wait and see what Denisuk can accomplish. She doesn't understand what the Demon Lord sees in Denisuk, but she decides to go check up on him to see if he's alright, and when she does, she finds him in the process of stuffing several bags with hay. She asks him what he's doing, so he tells her that he intends to go have a good conversation with Terius. She tries to tell him that it's pointless since he's not willing to negotiate, but Denisuk still thinks there's a chance. He just needs to look Terius in the eyes and convey his emotions properly so the two of them can understand each other. Almandra notices that Denisuk looks a lot more confident than he did before, and without an ounce of fear this time, he walks into the meeting room to talk to Terius. The next morning Almandra comes into the meeting room to check if Denisuk is still alive, but when she looks inside, all she finds is a room full of hay, and neither Denisuk nor Terius inside. At first, she thinks the negotiations must have failed, leading to a massive fight, but just then Denisuk comes in and tells her everything is fine. In that case, she demands to know why there's hay all over their sacred demon castle, and more importantly, she asks where Terius went. Denisuk tells her that Terius is currently finalizing the pact agreement with the Demon Lord, but Almandra can't believe Denisuk managed to get him to agree in just one night. He explains that he simply took the time to get to know Terius well, and that made the negotiation process really easy. Almandra had thought Terius was refusing to negotiate because he kept yelling no over and over, but in reality, Terius thought negotiations were going really well. Denisuk had experienced something like this before with an international client, and the client in question was really enthusiastic about saying no to him, so Denisuk thought the negotiation was going to end in failure, but to his surprise, the man then reached out for a handshake, so he realized it was all a misunderstanding. The same thing applied to Terius of Denisuk did a little research into Minotaur's culture, and found out that Minotaur always bring hay with them to act as their bed whenever they go to someone else's home, so all that time he was just trying to ask for his hay, and when Denisuk figured that out, there were no more problems with the negotiation. Now Almandra realizes that she had misunderstood Terius and left him in that room to sleep on the cold floor, so she feels really bad, but Terius tells her it's all right since it was an honest mistake, and shakes her hand to show that there are no hard feelings. As Terius is leaving, the Demon Lord comes up to Denisuk and Almandra and asks Almandra if she now understands why he wants to add Denisuk to their ranks. Almandra admits that Denisuk really is skilled when it comes to negotiating, and since he passed the Demon Lord's test, the Demon Lord officially makes him one of his 4 generals and puts a bracelet on his arm as a symbol of his position, and as a sign of her new respect for Denisuk, Almandra formally introduces herself to him, and says she looks forward to working with him as a new friend. Denisuk is finally starting to settle into his role as one of the demon generals, and it's nice that he's got his own office and a supportive boss, but this place is still going to take some getting used to. Since he is officially one of the demon generals now, he thinks he should formally introduce himself to the others, so he heads to Sylphid's room and knocks on the door. To his surprise, a girl answers the door and asks what he wants, so Denisuk tells her he's here to introduce himself to Sylphid. The girl then coldly tells him that she's Sylphid's assistant, and he's a very busy man, so she can't let Denisuk disturb him. Denisuk is disappointed, but he knew he was bound to face some pushback from the other demon generals, so he decides to just come back later to try again. However, before he could leave, Almandra comes running up to him because she has something important to say. The Demon Lord has another assignment for Denisuk, so Denisuk goes to meet with him immediately, and is informed of an agreement he is working on. For the demon army to grow in strength, he needs the support of all the surrounding demi-human tribes, and among all those tribes, the Ogre tribe is particularly influential. They possess a military force equal to that of the demon army, and as a result, it could become a threat to the demon empire if they were to become hostile. That is why the Demon Lord wants to have a merger negotiation with them so they can combine their forces, but the ogres are notoriously difficult to negotiate with, so nothing has been decided on yet. However, with Denisuk on the case, the Demon Lord is sure he will be able to reach an agreement with them, so he's granting him full authority on the matter. Denisuk is glad to see that the Demon Lord trusts him so much, but there's a real chance of him dying to the ogres if he goes alone, so Almandra volunteers to escort him to the ogre tribe. However, before that, Denisuk says he wants to go meet with Genome since she's in charge of the demi-human division of the demon army, and she might have some valuable information about the ogres. Almandra thinks Denisuk is right, but she absolutely refuses to go anywhere near Genome because she has generational beef with her, so instead, she says she'll go check on the carriages while Denisuk talks with Genome. Denisuk heads out into the training grounds where Genome is holding her daily training session, and he is impressed with what he sees because not only are Genome's men skilled in combat, but she also keeps their morale really high. Once training is done, she turns to address Denisuk and asks what he wants. Denisuk tells her he's here to ask if she knows anything about the Ogre tribe, and she doesn't know much, but she tells Denisuk that their leader Ogre is notoriously difficult to have a conversation with, so he's going to have a hard time negotiating with him. There's nothing she can really do to help him on this one, and she would never want to work on anything with Almandra anyway, so she asks Denisuk to get her out of here. Denisuk didn't even realize Almandra had been standing behind him, so he asks her why she's here, and why she's so angry. Almandra says she already finished checking the carriages, so she came to get Denisuk since she was worried about him, but she kept containing herself after seeing Genome, so the two start arguing, and Denisuk is starting to get worried about how much Almandra and Genome hate each other. Denisuk and Almandra eventually arrive at the Ogre Castle, but before they could enter, they are stopped at the gate and told to wait until Ogre gives them permission to enter. Almandra thinks it's ridiculous that they are being kept outside so long, but Denisuk has seen this before and knows Ogre is just trying to use this to throw them off so they won't be able to negotiate. That's why it's important that they keep their cool, but Almandra is on the verge of exploding in rage. Thankfully, before she gets act out, Ogre's assistant comes out and tells the two that they may now enter, but as they walk in, Denisuk notices how scruffy Ogre's armor look. Eventually, they make it to Ogre's throne room and come face to face with Ogre himself, but when Almandra tries to start the negotiations, he tells her to shut up. He doesn't care why they are here because he's never going to listen to what they have to say unless, of course, they came to surrender him. In which case he might hear them out, but only if they agree to kill their chief, the Demon Lord. Almandra can't believe the levels of bad words she just heard from Ogre's mouth, so she's about to crash out right now, but Denisuk grabs her hand and tells her to calm down because a violent crash out is exactly what Ogre is hoping for. He then turns to Ogre and in his most polite businessman voice, he says he and Almandra are going outside to have a brief chat. Outside, Almandra lets out all her rage and curses the very existence of Ogre for daring to say such a thing. She's fully prepared to go back in there and tear Ogre limb from limb, but Denisuk calms her down and tells her they can't react to his provocation because that's exactly what he wants. He intentionally saying things to get them angry in hopes that they cause a scene so negotiations break down. That way he can avoid directly rejecting the negotiation and blame its failure on the two of them. Now that she knows what Ogre was trying to do, Almandra decides to calm herself down, but she's still really frustrated by the fact that Ogre insulted the Demon Lord. To be honest, Denisuk is just as angry, but acting on that anger would only hurt their chances of success here, so they have to be careful about how they respond. With that said though, Ogre isn't willing to negotiate, so there's not much they can do at this point. Just then the girl from before shows up and she introduces herself as Ogre's daughter Orliula. She knows this may come off as rude, but she has a request to make, so she asks for Denisuk and Almandra's help in taking the throne from her father. She leads Denisuk and Almandra to an empty room and explains that this is the food storage, and as they can see it has no food. The ogre is known for its strength and influence among the demihumans, but recently, they've run into financial trouble and has gotten so bad that a lot of their people are struggling to find food to eat. Denisuk then assumes something like this was going on because when they came in, he saw the terrible state of the ogre's equipment along with the cold and empty feeling he got from the castle itself. This kind of situation usually occurs when large companies begin to decline. They make it seem like everything's going well, but on the inside, they are constantly on the brink of bankruptcy. That's exactly what's going on with the ogre tribe, and Orliula believes that the only way to rebuild it is to rely on the demon army's help. However, her father refuses to listen to her, and on top of that, he is currently sick. They've been trying to keep this fact hidden, which is why they had Almandra and Denisuk outside while they prepared him for the meeting, but his condition just keeps getting worse and soon, he is going to pass away. If Ogre were to die with things as they are now, it would be the end of their tribe, so she pleads with Denisuk to help her. Denisuk says he understands her concerns, but he also scolds her for sharing such vital information. As the daughter of the chief, she needs to be more careful about the people she trusts. When Orliula can tell that Denisuk is a good person, she's pretty confident in her ability to discern the nature of people, which is why she told him about the situation, and now she asks Denisuk to help her save the ogre tribe by marrying her. After hearing this, Denisuk freaks out and Almandra begins burning with rage, but Orliula is serious about her proposal. All the ogres in her tribe are as dumb as rocks, so the only way for Orliula to ensure the prosperity of the demon army is for a smart guy like Denisuk to marry her and become the new chief. Denisuk tries to talk Orliula out of making any rash decisions, but Orliula is convinced that this is the only way to save the ogre tribe, so she's willing to make their marriage official immediately, but Almandra doesn't let that happen. Later that night, Denisuk is sitting in his office and wondering how he's going to get himself out of this mess because Ogre refuses to negotiate with him and Orliula wants to marry him. He can afford to fail on his second assignment for the Demon Lord, so he decides to go to the bar in his head so he can clear his thoughts. However, this time he's not alone because Denisuk's imaginary version of Almandra is sitting at the table next to him arguing with the bartender about which is cooler, gorillas or lions. Realistically, a gorilla is mopping the floor with a lion any day of the week, but Almandra counters saying lions are cooler because a group of lions is called a pride. As soon as Denisuk hears this, he snaps out of his trance, and he now has a foolproof idea of how to handle this. First thing the next morning, Denisuk calls Almandra outside and he apologizes for waking her up so early, but he needs her help so they can go do some negotiating, but for Denisuk's plan to work they need to go somewhere else first, and if all goes well then Ogre is the one who will be begging for a negotiation meeting. 1 week later, Denisuk and Almandra are called into the chief's throne room just like Denisuk had planned, and Ogre looks pretty mad. He just found out that all the surrounding tribes formed an alliance with the demon army over the past week, and he wants an explanation. A week ago, Denisuk told Almandra about his plan to recruit the smaller tribes first instead of trying to convince Ogre. It shouldn't be too hard because just like the Ogre tribe, the other tribes are struggling with the food shortage, so they can be swayed by the promise of support. Almandra understood Denisuk's plan, but she didn't expect it to work so well by forcing Ogre into negotiations. Denisuk's strategy was based on something he had to do when he was selling a product back on Earth. If he tried to approach a big company directly, he would usually be rejected, so he decided to first market to all the smaller companies and sell them his product, and eventually the big company would be forced to contact him and ask for the product as well, so they wouldn't be left behind. Similarly, if all the surrounding demihumans joined the demon army, then the prideful chief wouldn't let that go without a response. For now, Denisuk plays dumb and acts like he simply offered to form an alliance with the smaller groups because they were struggling to survive and needed the support of the demon army, but that makes Ogre even angrier since he never agreed to any negotiations. Everything is going according to plan because now that Ogre has lost his cool, he is much more susceptible to Denisuk's negotiation tactics. Denisuk then starts explaining that the alliances weren't formed by him alone because he had help from Orliulu. Ogre can't believe that his own daughter would betray him like this, but she tells him that it was necessary for the sake of their Ogre tribe. The only way out of their current situation is to rely on the demon army's aid, and as much as he may not want to admit it, times have changed. He's grown old, is currently sick, so they need to join the demon army if they are going to survive. Just then Denisuk chimes in and offers an alternative to Ogre. Instead of joining the demon army, they could form an equal partnership. To be honest, Denisuk just made that thing up because he hasn't changed anything about the deal, but if he says it's an equal partnership, then the proud Ogre chief is bound to be more willing to accept. As expected, Ogre doesn't seem opposed to the idea, but he asks them to give him some time to think it over. A couple of days later, Almandra comes running into Denisuk's office to tell him the good news. She tells Denisuk that Ogre has just agreed to the alliance with the demon army, and that's great news, but right now, Denisuk has more important things to worry about. The demon lord told him to pick out an assistant for himself, so he spent the past few days looking through applications to find the right person. Honestly, he wishes he could just pick Almandra since she's so reliable, and Almandra misunderstands this to be Denisuk's way of proposing, so she gets a little embarrassed. Just then there's another knock at the door, so Denisuk goes to check who it is and finds Orliulu there. She tells him she's here to act as a representative from the Ogre tribe for their alliance with the demon army, and she's incredibly grateful to him for his help since her father has become a lot more diplomatic ever since their encounter. She says she's willing to do anything to show her gratitude, and since she said anything, Denisuk asks her if she would like to become his personal assistant. Orliulu is more than happy to take the job, but Almandra is jealous, so she refuses to look Denisuk in the eye and reminds herself that they are rivals, so she can't be friends with him. Denisuk has no idea why she suddenly started acting so strange, but that aside, this has been a good month for him since the demon army has grown quite a bit, but whenever there's growth, there's also increased risk, so everyone needs to keep their guard up.